The year is 1939. In a small design office in Bavaria, a team of engineers huddles over blueprints that would one day rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. But in that moment, nobody believes in them. The concept seems absurd, an aircraft without a propeller, powered by something called a turbojet engine. When Willy Messerschmitt presents Project 1065 to the Reich Air Ministry, the response is tepid at best. Germany is confident. The Luftwaffe dominates the skies with conventional fighters. Why? Invest in unproven, fantastical technology? The war, they assure themselves, will be won with the machines they already have. The jet engine is a curiosity, nothing more. A dream that belongs in science fiction, not on the battlefield. But Messerschmitt sees something others don't. He envisions speed beyond comprehension, an aircraft that could outrun anything in the sky. His team begins work anyway, driven by a vision that exists only in calculations and wind tunnel tests. The path ahead is treacherous, filled with technical obstacles that have never been solved before. Metallurgy challenges, engine failures, skepticism from every corner. Yet they persist, these engineers working in the shadow of a war that grows larger and more desperate with each passing month. April 1941 arrives, and with it, a moment both promising and deeply frustrating. The Me-262 prototype takes to the air for the first time, but there's a humiliating catch. It flies with a conventional piston engine mounted. In its nose, a propeller spinning in front of a fuselage designed for the future. The jet engines, the revolutionary Junkers Umo turbojets that are supposed to make this aircraft special, aren't ready. They sit on the ground, incomplete, their secrets still locked away in laboratories where engineers struggle with temperatures and pressures never before encountered in aviation. The Me-262 flies, but it flies like any other aircraft. There is nothing revolutionary about it yet. Then, in February 1940, Hermann Göring makes a decision that will haunt Germany for years. The Reichsmarschall, chief of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's second-in-command, issues a decree, halt development of jet engines. The reasoning is simple, arrogant, and catastrophically wrong. Göring believes the war will be over by 1941. Germany is winning. France is about to fall. Britain stands alone. Why waste resources on experimental technology when victory is just months away? The jet program grinds nearly to a halt, strangled by bureaucratic optimism and the fatal hubris of men who cannot imagine losing. But wars don't end when dictators predict they will. Britain doesn't surrender. The Soviet Union enters the conflict, opening a vast eastern front that devours men and material at a staggering rate. The United States joins the Allies, bringing industrial capacity beyond anything Germany can match. The Luftwaffe, once unstoppable, begins to face opponents who learn, adapt, and multiply. Suddenly, the war that was supposed to end in 1941 stretches into 1942, then 1943, with no end in sight. The arrogance that killed the jet program looks less like confidence and more like catastrophic miscalculation. Despite Göring's decree, a handful of engineers refuse to abandon the dream entirely. Work continues in the shadows, underfunded and understaffed, but alive. The Junkers team struggles with the Umo 04 engine, wrestling with problems that seem insurmountable. The turbine blades must withstand temperatures that melt conventional metals. The compressor stages must be precisely manufactured to tolerances that strain German industry's capabilities. Materials are scarce: nickel, cobalt. The exotic alloys needed for jet engines are increasingly unavailable as the war consumes Germany's resources. Engineers resort to substitutes, inferior metals that they know will fail, but are all they have. July 18, 1942, a date that changes everything. At an airfield in Leifheim, Bavaria, at exactly 8:40 in the morning, test pilot Fritz Wendel climbs into the Me-262 V3 prototype. This time, there is no piston engine in the nose. This time, two Junkers Umo 004 turbojets hang beneath the wings, each producing 850 pounds of thrust. Wendel advances the throttles, and the aircraft responds with a sound no one has ever heard before. Not the roar of a piston engine, but a high-pitched shriek, a banshee wail that announces something entirely new. The Me-262 accelerates down the runway and lifts into the air under pure jet power. For the first time in history, a jet fighter truly flies. The flight reveals both promise and problems. The aircraft is fast, astonishingly fast, but the tail dragger landing gear configuration creates aerodynamic issues. Turbulence from the jet exhaust interferes with the tailplane, making control difficult. The engineers take notes, already planning modifications. Future prototypes will use tricycle landing gear, the nose wheel configuration that becomes iconic. But, in that moment, watching the Me-262 slice through the Bavarian sky, the handful of people who understand what they're witnessing know they've seen the future. The problem is that the future arrives too slowly. Throughout 1942 and into 1943, the Me-262 program lurches forward, plagued by technical challenges and bureaucratic indifference. The Jumo 004 engines fail with alarming regularity. Turbine blades shatter, compressors seize. The average service life of an engine is measured in hours, not hundreds of hours like piston engines, but tens of hours. 25 hours between overhauls becomes the target, and even that seems optimistic. Pilots will later describe the Me-262's engines as temperamental beasts, brilliant when they work, terrifying when they fail at the wrong moment. November 26, 1943. Adolf Hitler sees the Me-262 for the first time. The Führer arrives at the test facility, and what happens next becomes the subject of endless debate and recrimination. Hitler looks at the sleek, swept-wing fighter and asks a question. Can this aircraft carry bombs? The answer is yes, it can carry bombs, though it's designed as an interceptor. Hitler's face lights up. He calls it a blitz bomber, a fast bomber that could strike Allied positions and escape before fighters can respond. He orders that the Me-262 be developed for the bomber role. For decades after the war, this moment is portrayed as the disaster that doomed the Me-262. Luftwaffe generals, writing their memoirs, in the comfort of peacetime, blame Hitler for destroying the jet program. They claim that if only the Me-262 had been developed as a pure fighter, it could have changed the war's outcome. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most famous fighter aces, practically makes a career out of this narrative. Hitler the meddler, the non-expert who ruined everything. But the truth is more complex and far less comforting to those who want a simple villain. The Me-262's bomber capability had been planned long before Hitler's visit. Engineers had already designed bomb racks. Trials with 250-kilogram and 500-kilogram bombs were scheduled. The aircraft's versatility was always part of the concept. Hitler's interference delays fighter production by perhaps a month, maybe less. The real problems lie elsewhere, in the engines that keep failing, in the factories that can't produce enough units, in the strategic materials that Germany simply doesn't have, in the Allied bombing campaign that disrupts production at every turn. The winter of 1943 bleeds into 1944, and Germany's situation becomes increasingly desperate. Allied bombers pound German cities and industrial centers with mounting intensity. The Luftwaffe loses pilots faster than it can train replacements. Fuel shortages cripple operations. The fighters that once dominated the skies are increasingly outmatched by American P-51 Mustangs and British Spitfires. Germany needs a miracle. The Me-262 is supposed to be that miracle, but it remains frustratingly out of reach. March 1944. Production finally begins, but it's agonizingly slow. The factories can only deliver 13 to 16 aircraft in April. The manufacturing process is complex, requiring precision that Germany's war-battered industry struggles to achieve. The Jumo 004 engines remain the critical bottleneck. Each engine requires materials that are increasingly scarce. Nickel and cobalt, essential for high-temperature components, are unavailable in the quantities needed. Engineers use substitutes they know are inferior, creating engines that are essentially disposable, use them for their brief operational life, then throw them away and install new ones. It's wasteful, inefficient, and the only option available. August 1944. The Me-262 finally enters operational service with Erprobungskommando 262, a test and training unit at Lechfeld, south of Augsburg. On July 26th, Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber, flying Me-262A1A number 1317, damages an RAF reconnaissance Mosquito, which later crashes in Italy. It's the first victory for a turbojet fighter in aviation history. The age of the jet fighter has officially begun, and the men who fly these missions understand they're part of something unprecedented. The Me-262's performance is breathtaking. It can reach speeds exceeding 850 kilometers per hour, 530 miles per hour, making it about 120 miles per hour faster than the P-51 Mustang, the best Allied fighter in the European theater. When in Me-262 dives on a bomber formation, Allied fighter escorts simply cannot catch it. The Germans learn quickly, attack at high speed, fire, and accelerate away before the escorts can react. In pure performance terms, the Me-262 is untouchable, but pure performance doesn't win wars. The Allied pilots, initially shocked by this new threat, adapt with ruthless efficiency. They study the Me-262, identifying its weaknesses with the cold precision of men who understand that adaptation is survival. Cross. Engines are sluggish to spool up. Throttle response is slow compared to piston engines. This means the Me-262 is vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when it's slow and its engines can't quickly generate the thrust needed for evasive maneuvers. Allied commanders issue new orders. Identify the jet bases, patrol above them, and catch the Me-262s when they're most vulnerable. The hunter becomes the hunted. Me-262 pilots climbing away from their airfields or descending to land find themselves under attack from Allied fighters that have been waiting. The psychological pressure is immense. Every takeoff could be an ambush. Every landing could be a death trap. The Allied bombing campaign intensifies its focus on known jet bases, cratering runways and destroying facilities. The Me-262, for all its technological superiority, operates in an environment of complete Allied air dominance. Still, in the hands of skilled pilots, the Me-262 is devastating. German pilots claim 542 Allied aircraft destroyed, a figure corroborated by U.S. Navy data, though some claims go higher. On March 18, 1945, 37 Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 intercept a massive formation of 1,221 American bombers, escorted by 632 fighters. The jets tear into the formation, downing 12 bombers and 1 fighter, losing only 3 Me-262s. It's a tactical success that highlights what might have been, if only there had been more aircraft, more fuel, more time. By late 1944, production increases, but it's racing against a collapsing Reich. By August 1944, only 107 aircraft have been delivered. By the end of the year, 730 Me-262s have been completed. In the early months of 1945, another 564 are built, bringing the total to approximately 1,294 aircraft. But Germany is dying. The factories are under constant attack. Transportation networks are shattered. Fuel is desperately scarce. Though kerosene for jets is different from the refined aviation fuel piston engines require, it's still difficult to obtain in sufficient quantities. Pilot training is rushed because there's no time for the careful instruction that creates truly skilled aviators. January 1945. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter aces and a longtime advocate for the Me-262 as a fighter, is essentially forced out of his position in the Luftwaffe High Command after clashing with Göring over strategy and the misuse of fighters. But Galland doesn't fade away. He's given permission to form a special unit, an elite squadron that will fly the Me-262 in a last-ditch attempt to stem the Allied tide. He calls it Jagdverband 44, JV-44. Galland recruits the best of the best. The unit becomes a magnet for Germany's top aces, men with hundreds of victories between them, holders of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. The roster reads like a who's who of Luftwaffe legends. Johannes Mackie Steinhoff with 178 victories, Walter Krupinski with 197, Heinz Baer, Herbert Kaiser. The Knights Cross becomes informally the squadron badge. If you don't have one, you don't belong. It's the most elite fighter unit ever assembled, flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, and it's formed in the final months of a war that's already lost. JV-44 operates from bases in Bavaria as the Third Reich crumbles. The pilots are skilled enough to use the Me-262's advantages while minimizing its vulnerabilities. They score kills. Surviving records suggest approximately 47 Allied aircraft during April and May 1945. Heinz Baer becomes the top scorer with 16 kills while flying the Me-262. Georg Peter Eder claims at least 12. Galland himself claims 7 before he's shot down on April 26, 1945, wounded in the knee by return fire from an American bomber he's attacking. The image of Galland being wounded is almost too symbolic to bear. The legendary ace, flying the world's most advanced fighter, brought down not by Allied jets, which don't truly exist in operational numbers yet, but by defensive gunfire from a piston-engined bomber. It encapsulates everything about the Me-262's tragedy. Technologically superior but operationally insufficient. arriving too late into an environment where numbers and logistics matter more than individual performance. By April 1945, the end is obvious to everyone. American troops advance on JV-44's base near Salzburg. Galland, discharged from the hospital with his knee still damaged, organizes an evacuation to prevent his pilots and aircraft from falling into Soviet hands. Some Mi-262s are flown to Innsbruck. Others are deliberately destroyed, grenades inserted into engine intakes, explosions tearing apart aircraft that represent millions of Reichsmarks and thousands of engineering hours. The revolution ends not with a climactic battle but with pilots sabotaging their own machines to keep them from the enemy. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The Mi-262 program, which began with such promise in 1939, concludes with approximately 1,400 jets produced, only a fraction of which ever saw combat. Historians and military analysts immediately begin asking the inevitable question, what if? What if Hitler hadn't interfered? What if production had started earlier? What if Göring hadn't canceled jet development in 1940? What if Germany had deployed thousands of Mi-262s instead of hundreds? The answers are uncomfortable for those seeking simple narratives. Yes, Hitler's bomber obsession caused delays, but measured in weeks, not years. Yes, Göring's 1940 decision was catastrophic, but the technical challenges with the engines would have existed regardless. Yes, Allied bombing disrupted production, but Germany's strategic material shortages were fundamentally unsolvable by 1944. The Mi-262 didn't fail because of any single decision or person. It failed because revolutionary technology introduced into a losing war cannot overcome the fundamental mathematics of industrial capacity and strategic resources. The Allied powers recognized the Mi-262's significance immediately. American, British, and Soviet forces raced to capture intact aircraft. Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe secret technology, systematically collects German jets and ships them back for analysis. Engineers in the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union study every aspect of the Mi-262's design. The swept wings, the engine placement, the aerodynamics. Everything is measured, tested, and understood. The influence is immediate and obvious. The North American F-86 Sabre, which dominates the skies in Korea just 5 years later, shows clear Mi-262 heritage in its swept wings and overall configuration. The Soviet MiG-15, the Sabre's adversary, similarly reflects lessons learned from captured German jets. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet bomber, revolutionary in its own right, incorporates swept-wing technology pioneered by German research. Even the Nakajima Kika in Japan and the Sukhoi Su-9 in the Soviet Union show Mi-262 influence. The aircraft that barely affected World War II's outcome becomes the template for an entire generation of jet fighters and bombers. Some Mi-262s continue flying after the war. Czechoslovakia operates a small number until 1951, using captured German aircraft and spare parts. There are reports, never officially confirmed, that Israel may have acquired between 2 and 8 Mi-262s built by Avia and supplied covertly. The details remain murky, hidden in the classified sections of early Israeli military history. But if true, it means that the revolutionary German jet found itself flying under the Star of David, protecting a nation that emerged from the ashes of the very regime that created the aircraft. Several Mi-262s survive to the present day, preserved in museums around the world. They sit under carefully controlled lighting, their swept wings and sleek fuselages still capable of inspiring awe decades after their creation. Aviation enthusiasts build flying reproductions, usually powered by modern General Electric CJ610 engines, rather than the temperamental Jumo 004S. These recreations fly at air shows, the scream of modern turbojets approximating the sound that once terrified Allied bomber crews. The pilots who flew the Mi-262 in combat carry complex memories. On one hand, they flew the most advanced aircraft of their era, experiencing performance that made them feel invincible. The acceleration, the speed, the ability to climb away from any threat. These are sensations that define their understanding of aerial combat. On the other hand, they flew for a regime whose evil became undeniable, in a war that was morally indefensible, during a period when Germany's defeat was inevitable. The Mi-262 gave them moments of technological triumph in the context of comprehensive moral and strategic catastrophe. The Mi-262 story is ultimately about timing and context. Revolutionary technology introduced at the wrong moment in history can be simultaneously impressive and irrelevant. The aircraft was genuinely revolutionary. The first operational jet fighter, a machine that made every piston-engine fighter obsolete the moment it appeared. But it appeared when Germany had already lost the war through strategic overreach, moral bankruptcy, and industrial inadequacy. No amount of technological sophistication could compensate for those fundamental failures. There's a broader lesson here about innovation in warfare. The Me-262 demonstrates that technological superiority alone doesn't determine outcomes. Logistics matter, industrial capacity matters, strategic resources matter, training time matters. The ability to produce, maintain, and operate advanced weapons in large numbers matters more than having a small number of superior weapons. The Allied forces understood this. They didn't need to match the Me-262's performance. They needed to produce enough good fighters, train enough competent pilots, and establish air superiority through numbers and persistence. They did exactly that. Yet the Me-262's legacy extends far beyond its limited combat impact. It proved that jet-powered fighters were not just possible, but inevitable. It demonstrated design principles, swept wings, potted engines, tricycle landing gear, that became standard for jets worldwide. It showed what was coming, even if Germany couldn't fully exploit what it had created. Every jet fighter that followed, from the F-86 to the F-15 to the F-35, owes something to the pioneering work done by Messerschmitt's engineers in that small office in Bavaria back in 1939. The men who designed the Me-262 were not monsters. They were engineers solving fascinating technical problems, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in aeronautics. That their work served a monstrous regime complicates their legacy, but doesn't erase their contributions to aviation technology. The challenge for historians is to acknowledge both realities, the genuine innovation and the terrible context, without allowing either to overwhelm the other. In the end, the Messerschmitt Me-262 stands as a monument to potential unfulfilled. It was the right aircraft at the wrong time, revolutionary technology trapped in a collapsing system, a glimpse of the future that couldn't save a present already consigned to defeat. September 16, 1942. The actual first jet-powered flight was July 18, 1942, but the developmental period around this time marks when the revolution truly began, represents the moment when aerial warfare changed forever, even though the full implications wouldn't be felt for years. The jet age had begun. The Me-262 was its prophet, announcing a new era even as the old order burned around it. That it couldn't save Germany was inevitable. That it changed aviation forever was equally inevitable. Sometimes revolution happens in defeat, and legacies are built from failures. The Me-262 failed to change World War II's outcome, but succeeded in changing everything that came after. That paradox is its true significance, the reason we still study it, preserve it, and recognize its importance 8 decades later. The aircraft that arrived too late to matter ended up mattering more than almost any other aircraft of its era, not for what it accomplished in war, but for what it made possible in peace. The engineering brilliance of the Me-262 extended far beyond its engines and airframe. The armament configuration represented a quantum leap in firepower that fundamentally changed how interceptors engaged heavy bombers. 4 30mm Mk108 cannons clustered in the nose delivered devastating punch. Each cannon fired high explosive shells at 650 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity of 1,705 feet per second. The Mk108 was specifically designed for bomber destruction. A single hit from its massive shell could tear a wing off or rupture a fuel tank. 2 to 3 hits were usually sufficient to destroy a 4-engine bomber. But the true revolution in lethality came with the R4M rocket. In early 1945, German engineers developed this unguided air-to-air rocket specifically for the Me-262. Each rocket measured 55 millimeters in diameter and carried a warhead with 5.9 times the explosive content of the Mk108's already formidable shell. The Me-262 could carry 24 R4M rockets mounted on wooden racks beneath the wings, 12 per side. The tactical doctrine was brutally simple. Approach a bomber formation at high speed, fire the entire salvo of rockets from beyond, defensive gun range, then break away before the escorts could react. March 18, 1945, provided the proof. 37 Me-262s equipped with R4M rockets intercepted a massive formation of 1,228 American bombers, protected by 733 escort fighters. The rocket-armed jets tore into the formation with unprecedented effectiveness. When the smoke cleared, 13 bombers had been destroyed for the loss of only 2 Me-262s. German analysts rated the mission's effectiveness as outstanding and excellent. Statistical analysis later revealed that the R-4M increased the Me-262's combat effectiveness by a factor of 3.3 compared to cannon-only armament. Between March and April 1945, rocket-equipped Me-262s achieved a combat effectiveness ratio of 0.156, meaning roughly 1 bomber destroyed for every 6 combat engagements, compared to just 0.047 for cannon-armed jets in the preceding months. The numbers told a stark story. From July 1944 through February 1945, Me-262s and Me-163 rocket interceptors engaged in 85 air combat events with bombers and destroyed only 4, pathetic effectiveness that fell below even conventional piston-engine fighters. But in the final 2 months of the war, with R-4M rockets operational, the same jets engaged in 307 combat events and destroyed 48 bombers. It was a devastating weapon system that arrived exactly when it could no longer matter. Allied pilots who encountered the Me-262 never forgot the experience. Chuck Yeager, who would later become the first man to break the sound barrier, faced Me-262s on November 6, 1944. Yeager was flying escort for B-24 bombers near Minden when 5 Me-262s from Commando Nowotny attacked his formation. The speed difference was shocking. Yeager's P-51 Mustang could reach maybe 430 miles per hour in level flight, while the jets screamed past at well over 500. One Me-262 fired at Yeager and missed, and as it flashed by, he managed to get a few hits before it vanished into the clouds. The jet had become separated from his squadron, alone in enemy airspace. Exactly the vulnerable situation Allied tactics were designed to create. Flying over Akmer, Yeager spotted what appeared to be a camouflaged airfield with an unusually long runway. His instincts as a fighter pilot kicked in. Where there's a jet base, there are jets. He descended for a closer look, just as a lone Me-262 approached from the south at merely 200 miles per hour, landing gear down, vulnerable. Yeager dove, pushing his Mustang to 500 miles per hour in a near-vertical descent. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the ground, thick and accurate, filling the sky with deadly flak. Yeager fired a short burst from 400 yards. His tracers found the target, striking the jet's wings. The Me-262 crash-landed 400 yards short of the runway, a wing tearing off near the right engine nacelle. Yeager had to pull up hard to avoid the flak, thundering across the airfield at treetop level, while German gunners tried desperately to track him. Some shells missed him but hit friendly positions on the opposite side of the field in the chaos. Yeager's encounter epitomized the Me-262's operational reality. In a straight chase, the jet was untouchable, but every flight involved vulnerable moments. Takeoff, landing, the seconds when an engine flamed out or ran rough, the turns that bled off speed. Allied pilots learned to exploit these moments with predatory patience. They couldn't match the Me-262's performance, so they changed the nature of the engagement, turning every jet sortie into a gauntlet where the hunter could become prey in an instant. The Me-262 spawned multiple variants as German engineers desperately tried to extract every possible advantage from the design. The Me-262A1A was the standard fighter version with 4 30mm cannons. The Me-262A2A Sturmvogel, Stormbird, was the fighter-bomber variant Hitler had demanded, capable of carrying either 2 250-kilogram bombs or 2 500-kilogram bombs, though the added weight reduced maximum speed to 470 miles per hour. The Me-262B1A was a 2-seat trainer necessary because transitioning piston engine pilots to jets required specialized instruction. The differences in handling, engine response, and combat tactics were simply too significant for pilots to figure out on their own. More ambitious variants existed on drawing boards and in prototype form. The Me-262B2A Night Fighter featured an extended fuselage for additional fuel, a second crew member to operate, radar and navigation equipment, and Neptune radar with its distinctive antler antennae protruding from the nose. Plans existed for fitting the more advanced Berlin centimetric radar with its dish hidden in the nose, eliminating the drag-inducing external antennae. Some proposals included upward-firing cannons in the rear fuselage, allowing the night fighter to attack RAF bombers from below, exploiting their blind spot. a tactic German night fighters had used successfully with conventional aircraft. There were reconnaissance variants, heavily armed interceptor variants with 6 cannons instead of 4, even experimental versions testing more powerful engines and increased wing sweep. A 3-seat night fighter was proposed in the war's final weeks, cramming pilot, radio operator, and navigator into a lengthened fuselage with swept wings increased to 35 degrees and powered by the more advanced GS-01 Weapon engines. None of these advanced variants reached operational status. Time had run out. The technical specifications of the Me-262A-1A tell the story of what was achieved. Length, 34 feet 9 inches. Wingspan, 41 feet 4 inches. Height, 11 feet 6 inches. Empty weight, 8,367 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, 15,719 pounds. 2 junkers, Jumo 04B1 axial flow turbojets, each producing 1,180 pounds of thrust. Maximum speed, 560 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 37,570 feet. Range, 650 miles. Rate of climb, 3,900 feet per minute. These numbers represented performance that wouldn't be matched by Allied jets for years. The range figure, 650 miles, revealed one of the Me-262's critical limitations. Every sortie had to be carefully planned. Pilots couldn't afford to chase targets too far or engage in extended dogfights. Fuel management was constant mental calculation. The kerosene-based jet fuel was different from the high-octane gasoline piston engines required, which initially seemed like an advantage since Germany's synthetic fuel plants could produce it more easily. But by 1945, Allied bombing had crippled even these facilities. Me-262s sat grounded not because they were damaged, but because there was simply no fuel to fly them. The psychological impact of the Me-262 extended beyond its actual combat record. Every Allied bomber crew knew that somewhere above them, invisible until they attacked, jet fighters might be lurking. The sound alone was unnerving, that high-pitched shriek entirely unlike the throaty roar of piston engines. When Me-262s dove through formations, they appeared and disappeared so quickly that gunners barely had time to track them, let alone achieve accurate fire. The fear was disproportionate to the actual threat, but fear itself is a weapon. German pilots who flew the Me-262 experienced a strange duality. They possessed the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, yet they operated from bases under constant attack, flew with insufficient fuel, and watched the Reich collapse around them. The Me-262 gave them moments of absolute supremacy, the acceleration, the speed, the feeling of being untouchable, surrounded by overwhelming strategic defeat. Some described it as flying a sports car through a crumbling city, technically magnificent but functionally irrelevant to the disaster unfolding everywhere. The influence of the Me-262 on post-war aviation development cannot be overstated. When American, British, French, and Soviet engineers examined captured Me-262s, they weren't just looking at an enemy aircraft. They were studying a blueprint for the future. Every aspect was measured, tested, analyzed, and understood. The swept-wing design, initially adopted by Messerschmitt to address center of gravity issues, turned out to have profound aerodynamic advantages at high subsonic speeds, delaying the onset of compressibility effects that plagued straight-wing jets. The North American F-86 Sabre, which would dominate Korean skies and establish American air superiority in the early Cold War, directly incorporated Me-262 design principles. The swept wings, the podded engine configuration, even the overall aesthetic bore unmistakable German influence. Soviet designers working on the MiG-15 similarly studied captured Me-262 technology, creating a swept-wing jet that would challenge the Sabre in combat. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet bomber, revolutionary in its use of swept wings on a large aircraft, traced its lineage directly to German wartime research and the Me-262's pioneering work. But perhaps the Me-262's greatest legacy was demonstrating conclusively that the era of the piston engine fighter was over. The performance gap was simply too large. Within a decade of the war's end, every major air force had transitioned primarily to jets. Propeller-driven fighters became obsolete almost overnight, relegated to ground attack roles or training. The Me-262 had shown the future, and once seen, that future became inevitable.